intro video, for some reason, always gets frozen on this thing. How you doing? You have come to a class online about fruit trees, growing fruit trees, shrubs, and vines, because there's more than just fruit trees. This is different than the vegetables and herbs class that we taught earlier. Um, we're mostly talking about larger perennial plants, shrubs, vines, trees, mostly fruit bearing, and some seed bearing. We'll go over some different types of weirdo things. These are going to be mostly non-native plants, um, although we will talk about some native stuff along with some of this, because some of the popular fruit trees that are grown, there's some native versions of that. So that's kind of cool, right? This is the part where I'm always kind of slowly stalling because there's people still joining on. But
let's talk about the upcoming classes.
Let's talk about the upcoming classes. So this is the last class that we have planned in this format, where you watch this YouTube live video. The next classes are going to be done by Strategic Habitat Enhancements. That's Carrie Ann Campbell. She's done a lot of classes with us in the past. There's two classes. If you go on our online classes page on our website, it will show you how to sign up for them. One's going to be called the Food Garden, and the other one's called Native Plants for Pollinators. So anyway, those are the next classes. And everything's on our web page as far as like links and how you sign up for that. It's not the same as signing up for these classes, so be aware of that. It's to get into that class, you have to do something different and just follow the instructions and all the links and stuff. So I thought I'd start off this class today with some books, because I'm a book guy, and I don't know why I chose this class to do books, because there's not a lot of good fruit tree books out there. But I'm going to show you a few, and then Katie's going to text in the background. No, if you have questions, the number in the bottom of the screen right there is what you can text there, or if you're on YouTube, you can message on YouTube. And the sun is in my face. Why is the sun in my face right now? Okay, so books, and this is all stalling to until all the people come in, right? We do this every week. So the old school book that people used to go to is this one, Old Brookbank. Rest in peace. He was an old dude. And this book is kind of old school. He tells you to put ammonium nitrate on your grapes in the summer. Not my thing, but it's good to go over, I guess. He has this mentality that's the old school gardening, which is like attack nature and synthetic whatever. This is the old school book. I use it to educate myself on what other people are doing, and there is some seasonal information in here that's interesting, but not my favorite book. I respect those old gardeners and stuff. They were working with what they had at the time, so whatever. There's these funny books from Phoenix. Phoenix. So they're extreme gardening. Yeah. So this guy, Dave Owens, the garden guy, he's got the garden guide book, and then he's got extreme gardening. And what I do like about this dude is he does everything organically. He's still a little bit caught up in the old school way of gardening, but there's some good seasonal information in here. One of these, I think it's this. Yeah, no, the garden guide book is a calendar type book, and it will tell you when to feed and prune and all that. This book goes over different crops. They're kind of weird, but I actually do read these sometimes and go through them, just because I think some of his information he does grow stuff, and he grows them. It sounds like mostly organically. I don't know how strict he is about that. He also is into growing green grass too, so that's why Phoenix. So there's that. There's not a lot of good information about local fruit tree growing. I'm just going to say that right away. But there's Nabhan's book, Growing Food in Hotter, Drier Land. This book is kind of heady and not very practical. Sorry, Nabhan. He's a friend, but not your friend. I don't know. Anyway, there is some good information in here, and but you know what I prefer for the information? All the information in here that's actually pretty good is already in this book, and you should own this one. This one is really good, and this is all about rainwater harvesting, how to landscape your landscape your yard such that you take advantage of rainwater and all that. Local permaculture. So this is a good book. And we sell this one. We sell actually volume 1 and volume 2, and they're both updated.
Are they signed? I don't think we had them signed.
No, we didn't make them
Darn
sign. And there are little books like this. Jacqueline Soul, I think, did this one. It's okay. It's still a little old school. And it's organized by month. So it kind of tells you what to do. Whatever. I think it's really important to. I mean, we're going to go through how to grow fruit trees, but I think it's more important to know how to utilize the fruits that you're growing, because I think people get caught up in growing things and then they grow this fruit and they don't know what to do with it all. So books like Keeping the Harvest. This is a great book. Let me get this picture without the sun glaring in. This is an old classic, but I like this book. It's got some fermentation, some drying, there's recipes, but just how to preserve your harvest. I think that's really important. Books like, I have another one here. What did I do with it?
What? Which one?
The Tartine book.
Did you find it?
Yeah, I did.
No.
Hey, talk to them for a second. I'm going to find it. I'll be right back.
Hi. Ethel, don't go. Ethel, come back. Hi.
I found him. Okay, so I love this book, Bar Tartine. This is a cookbook, but it's more than a cookbook. There's a lot of talk about how to make spices and how to make preserves out of the stuff that you're growing. Basically what I'm telling you, if you want to grow fruit trees, learn how to cook and learn how to, more than cook, learn how to ferment. You know this one, right? It's art of fermentation. So what I'm telling you is buy a lot of cookbooks and read a lot about preserving and cooking, because that is what you're going to end up doing when you are growing all these fruit trees. So anyway, oh yeah, and I just wanted to share some other books too, not on topic, but I think you hear me talk a lot about, in these classes I always bring up plant families, and I bring up a little bit of taxonomy. A good beginner's book on botany in a Day, the patterns method of plant identification. This is an older book, but it's really well done, and it gives you some tools on how to identify plants. And if you really want to dig in deep and have an updated book, Plants of the World, this book right here is amazing and fun. It's really, I think, important to learn the history of the plants you're dealing with, where they're from, what they're related to. And the cool thing about this book is it's updated, so it's all the proper plant families. It's also, we've got little maps on where the families exist. It'll just give you a lot more information about plants and where they're from and how they grow and all that. So anyway, that's it. Oh, one more book because I love books. La Bonne Table. This is Ludwig Bemelmans. This is just a food book. Ludwig Bemelmans was the guy who wrote. Oh, what's it called? The girl in the school. Madeline.
Madeline.
So remember, yeah, Madeline, the girl in the French school. It's a kid's book. Well, the author of Madeline. Madeline.
It's Madeline.
I don't know what it is. I don't know French, but like La Bonne Table is his book and illustrations of his experience as a server. I think it's the 30s, 1930s maybe. Anyway, he was a server, and he was unholy, and I think he's the one that got sent to New York by his parents because he shot someone. He shot someone, and his parents, they didn't kill anyone. They got into an argument. In the old days, you did a gun battle and you shot each other, and you got into a duel.
Gun battle.
And he got sent to the United States. And they're like, you and your gun ways, go to the United States. I don't know. Anyway, this is a fun book. He illustrated it all too in his Madeline way, but just really funny stories of him making fun of the patrons and life in the kitchen, and he was a server, the life in that industry. Anyway, books. Let's get into class. So first you're going to see some Forever Mirrors. Whoa, oh my goodness, what's that? Here we are. Okay, finally on to class.
You drunk?
No. So this is a class on growing fruit trees in Baja, Arizona. Baja, Arizona, we say a lot. It's in reference to the lower part of Arizona that was part of the Gadsden Purchase of Arizona. It's geographically different, climatically different, and culturally different. Does anyone know what fruit that is in the picture? There's a delay in this video on this, what do you call it? It's not Zoom. Streaming. Yeah, thank you. There's a delay, so I'm not going to expect you to answer that right now. But you probably know that's a Australian finger lime, and I've grown this before. It's a fun plant to grow. It's a citrus. It's weird. We'll talk about all this citrus later, but that's the picture in the header. So we all growing fruit trees. Some of you all just love fruits. Some of you all are interested in the heritage of it. That's why I put the Jujube in the picture here, because in the history of Tucson, Jujube came here because of the Chinese. And the Chinese, when they moved here, they brought Jujube. They grew them at their stores and on their farms. The Chinese became our farmers back in the day. But anyway, Jujube was part of their culture, and they always grew it. So in areas where there was old Asian, there were always Jujubes growing. So that's kind of interesting. It's a really cool plant. We'll talk about it later, but that's why it's in the picture. Some of you might, like me, care about wildlife, and fruit trees are actually really good wildlife plants. And also, food preservation. If you're into making preserves, making different ingredients that last on the shelf, fruit trees are, of course, a good crop for that. Some of you just like the aesthetics of fruit trees, and you might grow certain types of fruit trees because of the way they look. I just like growing things, so of course I just grow everything that I can get my hands on. That's, well, not everything, but I like growing things. And some of you might be preppers, who knows? It is feeling like the end of the world lately. But there's a lot of reasons to grow fruit trees. Are fruit trees worth watering? We do live in a desert. We live in a place where water is precious. My answer to that is yes, it's worth watering. I'm not going to tell you how to feel about it. I always say this to people: when you're watering plants, especially plants that give something back to nature, it's really the only time that we're taking the water out of the ground and giving it back. Because when you grow a fruit tree, you are going to grow a lot more things than fruit trees. Kinds of wasps and bugs. You're going to be feeding birds. And it's just when we really go back. We really give that water back to the wildlife that we're taking it from. So I think it's trees. And I'm not big on watering Australian plants because they don't give a lot back. A lot of evolved with a totally different fauna, and totally different insects and animals, and so they don't really. It's not that our native fauna doesn't use those plants at all, but they don't use them as much. But somehow fruit trees have all been pretty. They give a lot back. The most fruit trees are domesticated. I put a pug in here because obviously that's not a native animal anywhere, and that is sort of the case with a lot of fruit trees. They're like the pugs of the plant world. They have been selected over a long time for large fruits and flavor, and maybe the ability to grow in our agricultural system. They're needy a little bit more, so you're going to do a little more work when you plant them. You're going to give them a little more love in terms of feeding. They're usually a lot of our fruit trees can't even, they've been bred so much for the quality of the fruit that they don't even live well on their own, and they need to be grafted onto the rootstock of a related plant that will be a little tougher. So most of what we're going to talk about today does not occur in nature. These are domesticated plants. But there are a few exceptions to that. But anyway, because of that, you're going to dig. And we've done a lot of that in our yard here. You're going to dig and amend. And a lot of the rules that we have that we've gone over in other classes about vegetable gardening and such, it applies to this too. We're trying to create a lot of biology in our soil, a little more than, or a little different than what would normally be in our desert soils. So you're going to amend with lots of organic material. And that picture up in the upper right hand corner is the first rain that I had after I
planted the water.
Yeah, but what's it called when you? I have a thing about losing words. When you scape such that the water goes down lower, and what's that word? It doesn't matter.
Basin?
Yeah, but there's a word. There's a word like when you use a bulldozer to push dirt around. Grade. Thank you. That's it. Grade. So the first thing you always do, and this is true about native plants or not native plants, you grade so you know where the water is going. That's what that picture in the upper right-hand corner is. We saw the water was going where we wanted it to. And that third small picture is after that. So that's actually the vegetable garden, although actually we have some fruit trees in that vegetable garden now, and we're about to plant more too. But you're going to have to do a little more work, and you don't have to do what I do. I'm insane. I dug down deeper than that actually in these basins. This was in the middle of the project, but and you should wear better footwear too. Not a good idea to wear sandals and jumping on shovels. But anyway, when you're planting fruit trees, a lot of the same rules apply in general for planting. Don't bury the base of the plant. Mulch without burying the base of the plant. Create basins to make it easier for you to water. Don't beat up the root ball. People want to beat up the root ball, or they think that you should rough it up, or don't do that. Especially citrus. Citrus have a hard time bouncing back from root disturbance, so don't mess with the root ball with citrus especially, but just don't do it anyway. Most of our fruit trees are not giant trees. There are a few exceptions that we'll see, but because they're not giant trees, if you do have a fatter root going around, it won't matter as much because these aren't giant trees. Eucalyptus or mesquite or native mesquite, it's a 50-foot tree. Those kind of trees, if you do see a fat root going around 3/4 of the way, you might pull that out a little bit, but you're still going to have some disturbance, and the tree's not going to be happy about it. So just try not to do it. And it's better to just plant the plant. They usually find their ways out of those tight root balls if it's a fairly root-bound plant. And take it off those stakes. The stakes that are used in nurseries are not for you. They're for the nurseries. It's for the convenience of the nursery to keep the plants in, and they're going to be all growing next to each other, and they just do it as a habit too, and they just like strap these stakes with. It's stupid. Just take them off the stakes. It's one of the first things you should do. There's some rare instances where the plant might need some staking afterwards, but I'm going to tell you this. If you're planting a 5-gallon plant, which is most of the time the size that you're going to be dealing with, that plant's going to look nothing like it's going to look in years to come. So if there's a couple of branches that are touching the ground, it won't matter, because that plant's going to find new leaders. It's going to keep growing. And also, trees are toughened and calloused by the wind. You need to let them blow around. So avoid the stakes. You don't really need them. Take them off. If the plant is just like, sometimes you do get a plant that's just like laying on the ground after you take it off the stake. That's kind of a crappy tree if you get one like that. You might need to stake that a little bit, but it's more for you than the tree. The tree would find its way. It's just to make you feel better. So anyway, feed organically. This is always our message. You're trying to increase the biology in the soil. So I happen to like this company, Down to Earth, for a lot of reasons. They do pretty good organic food, and they package in mostly recyclable or stuff that can break down. So it's not like plastic. I like this stuff. In general, feed. If you're feeding organically and it's a bunch of low numbers, you're probably fine. Everyone talks about specific nutrient requirements, which we will go over when we go over the plant profiles. But in general, if you're feeding a little bit of nitrogen and phosphorus, and you're feeding some micronutrients, you're probably going to be fine. Unless you have some kind of weird soil thing going on where your soil is more alkaline than normal, a lot of caliche maybe there's some crap buried in the soil because of who was living there before you. Who knows? But for the most part, like if you fed with something like this, a citrus mix, you probably wouldn't need anything else. You could feed everything with a citrus mix. You don't need an apple tree food. You don't need a blueberry. Well, maybe blueberry because it's acidic. It needs acidic. But most normal plants that you're growing, common plants that we grow in Tucson, you could use something like this for everything. Most fruit trees, as we mentioned before, are so domestic that they can't live on their own root system, so they are grafted, which means that you're going to have to remove some of these suckers. See that little sprig coming out there on the bottom? That's going to be the branches coming from the rootstock, and you don't want to put a lot of energy into that, so you usually prune those off. And normally the scar is visible enough. This is pretty easy to see on this plant. Sometimes the graft is so smooth that it's a little hard to see, but if you look really closely, you'll be able to figure it out, where the graft is. They graft things because some trees, because they've been selected for their fruit quality, they're not so tough, and so they graft them on something that's really tough, that's related, usually in the same genus, usually in the same species, not always, but in general, it's there because the root stock is tougher and can do a better job of feeding the top than the root system of the plant that's been bred. That's what happens when you have pugs, man. Chilling requirements. So this is mostly only applying to deciduous fruit trees. They're native to temperate climates. You have to pay attention to this when you're buying fruit trees, especially these kind. it's a number of the chilling hours are the number of hours between November 1st and February 15th that are below 32 degrees, between 32 degrees and 45 degrees, low temperatures, and under 500 chill hours is ideal for Tucson. Ideal for Tucson's like 100 or 200, but you can get away with 500. So just be aware of that's what that means. Chill hours means that how tolerant is this plant of our warm climate. This is changing, by the way, and that's why I say 100 hours or 200 hours is more appropriate, maybe 300 than 500 even, because of global warming. Sorry if you don't believe in global warming, but you're wrong. The the climate is warming, and we have less chill hours as a consequence. And so you might even aim more towards 300 or 400 hours for Tucson. 500 is sort of the old school answer to that question, but we don't live in the old school anymore. We live in a changing world. So be aware of that. This is not important for the tropical or subtropical or desert plants. So. And speaking of winter, for some of your more tropical things, you should have a plan for covering them or not. You might let them freeze back. I've decided I have a muckrat tree, and it's a citrus. It uses a leaf instead of the fruit. Actually, you can use the fruit too, but the leaf is the important ingredient. If you've ever had tom kha gai soup, that's the leaf. We don't use the other name that's more popular because it's actually an African slur, so just know that. But I call it muckrat. That's the Asian word for that tree. We haven't covered it in the last few years. It always freezes back. This year, I'm actually going to go out of my way and build a frame around it. Cloth is better to use, by the way, than plastic because cloth actually is a little more insulative than plastic is. However, the convenience of using something clear means that you may be able to leave it on if the plant is still photosynthesizing, but it also could get too hot. So in that lower right-hand corner, there's that almost plastic box that plant's living in. You could just, if you built a frame where you could just pull it off, you'd be fine, and put it back on, if it's going to be cold again. But just have a good plan for protection. That's the main idea here. Again, I use frost cloth, and you can buy them in big rolls. We bought a big roll for the nursery because we have some plants to cover in the nursery, and I'll be using that to cover my fruit trees this year. I have a few trees that are frost tenders, so I'm going to build a box around them, like a frame. So, grow things. Oh, question.
Have you ever tried growing a mango tree?
I have. Well, yeah, I have in the night. We'll go over mangoes. It's in the it's in the plant. Okay, yeah, I did what you did too. I planted the seed and it actually sprouted and lived for a while. The thing about that is it's going to take a while for that to get up to size, and it might not be as good because it's not an asexual reproduction of that plant. It's a sexual reproduction, which means any combination of the parent's genetics may show up in that seed. Mangoes usually turn out okay. The favorite mango that I ever had was in Sonora. When I was a kid, I moved here and I started going to Sonora, and mango's a weed there. Actually, it's escaped cultivation, and it was in the Rio Mayo, and there was a weed mango tree that had sprouted up in the Rio Mayo. It was the best mango I've ever eaten, and the reason wasn't because of the variety of the mango. It was because it had ripened on the tree and fallen off, and I picked the fruit up off the ground and I ate it. So it wasn't like picked green and then shipped over here, and God knows what they do to it to get it across the border, because ag rules are so weird, because they're protecting the crops, but having that weed mango was one of my most mind-blowing experiences. I realized how much I really loved mango because of that. Same with papaya. You might think you don't like papayas. You've never had a good one. I'm telling you that because there are no good papayas in the U.S. I don't know if they freeze them or something. I don't know what they do, but they come over here and they taste like vomit. That is not what a real papaya tastes like. But anyway, the other thing I'm going to tell you is to grow what you like. Grow what you're going to use. Grow what fascinates you. In our yard, we have a surprising lack of citrus in our yard, but the ones we have are weird. We have muskrat, which I already mentioned, and we have uzu, which is the fruit that's in that picture there, which we made uzu marmalade out of, which we use for tea. We use for making cocktails. But it's uzu is an important ingredient in Japanese and Korean food too. So we grow that because it's hard to get. I tend to try to grow things that you can't find in the grocery store. So of course they're harder to get too. So it's really hard to find uzu and muskrat.
Buddha hand.
Yeah, well, we have the Buddha hand citrus too. So
all of our citrus is weird.
We have all weird. Well, no, we have the Mexican lime. Yeah, Mexican lime's a good one to get, even though it's really easy to find Mexican lime in the grocery store. They produce a lot of fruit, and it's something that everyone uses. So, let's go through the plant profiles. That's what the bulk of this class is all about. Question?
No.
You're watching this too, right?
Yeah.
Okay. So, apple, Malus pumila. It's in the Rosaceae. So this is a deciduous fruit tree. Can grow 30 to 50 feet tall. In Tucson, usually much smaller. There are many varieties that are self-fruitful. So when I say self-fruitful or self-pollinating, it means you don't need a second one to pollinate it. And we're going to say these same things throughout this whole class about all the crops, because that's a big question a lot of people have is, do I need a second one? So I'm going to make sure that you have that answer. You're mostly going to fertilize this in the spring. When I say fertilize, every single time when I say fertilize, I mean organically. I do never condone synthetic fertilizers. I just don't. And, you know...
Especially for stuff you eat.
Especially for stuff you eat, exactly. But you know, just once or twice in the spring is sufficient. Usually before the leafing, you know, right before the leaves come out or right before the flowers come out. The flowers come out actually before the leaves. They're really pretty when they bloom, like most of these Rosaceae trees, which are many of the fruits that are that you're familiar with are Rosaceae, if they're not citrus. So fertilize them in the spring. When I say spring, I mean here in Tucson spring. Bees really love the flowers. You'll hear the tree blooming when it's blooming. Pretty easy to grow. These are the varieties that you usually see in Tucson. Anna's the most popular one and pretty easy to grow. It is self-fruitful, but it does give you more production if you have another type of apple tree around it, like a golden Dorset Shimer. But 200 chill hours, so that's a really good chill hour thing, or chill hour rating for us. Einsheimer is sometimes available. That's 100 chill hours, so really good for here. Ghost apple, self-fruitful, that's 300 to 400 chill hours, and it has white flesh, white skin, I'm sorry. And then Golden Dorset's the other one you see a lot of here, and it's 100 chill hours. That's the one that we were selling. I think we might even have one right now.
We had Anna's and Golden Dorset.
Anna's and Golden Dorset were the ones that we sold this year. And every time we go through these crops, I'm going to just have Mission Garden varieties. There's going to be a lot more Mission Garden varieties coming out as time goes on. We're actually working with some people to bring those Mission Garden varieties to the public. But they have their own varieties, which are often related to the popular varieties that we're going to be talking about. But sometimes they've been around before those popular varieties. And usually they're trees that lasted on a homestead, a pioneer homestead for, almost 100 years before they were found by people and and brought him back to Mission Garden to bring him back. So that's what Mission Garden varieties. And we'll talk a little bit more about Mission Gardens at the end of this class because I think they're important to know. Apricot is another fairly popular plant. Prunus armeniaca, yeah, armeniaca. I don't know, whatever. The only person who's going to get mad at you for mispronouncing Latin is the Pope. Not a spoken language anymore. So again, a deciduous tree, moderate to fast growing, 15 to 30 feet tall. On all these heights, most of the heights you can kind of picture at the lower end in Tucson. In the low desert, they tend to be a little. There are trees that are up to 30 feet in Tucson. It's usually self-fruitful. All cultivars benefit from a second tree, though. It's always good if there's more pollen around, but they can pollinate themselves. Feed them just before blooming. Bees love the flowers. It's going to be the same for mostly all rosaceae. There are crosses between apricots and plums called apriums or pluets, depending on the ratio of the parents. So these are the varieties. Gold Kissed is fairly popular. That's 300 hours. Katie, spelled just like you, just with a Y. 200 to 400 hours. I think that's the best one for here. Flavored Delight, that's a 300-hour one. That's a hybrid. So that's an aprium. And then there are Mission Garden varieties of these. Peach and Nectarine, same species. Prunus persica, rosaceae, deciduous tree, 15 to 25 feet high, moderate water, full to part sun. Full to part sun on all these so far. And a little bit of a break in the afternoon is a pretty good idea for most of these deciduous rosaceae trees because, especially now, we had the hottest summer ever. July and August are both record hot months in Tucson. So afternoon shade is probably a good idea. Feed in late winter just before blooming. Fertilize in spring before flowering. This also attracts bees and birds, of course. Nectarine cultivars are nectarine cultivars are basically peaches that are not fuzzy. Nectarines don't do well in Tucson, so you're gonna really focus on peaches here. Just buy your nectarines. They don't like our summer heat, so focus on peaches. Desert Gold, probably one of the most popular ones. Bonanza is also really popular, the 250 hours. Desert Gold's 200 hours. Florida Prince, if you can find it, it's a really good one. It's semi-freestone, 150 hours. So there's clingstone, freestone, and semi-freestone. What that means when you're talking about peaches and plums and all that is how much the fruit sticks to that pit in the middle. Some people really care about that. I care a little bit more about flavor when it comes to these sorts of things, but it is convenient to be able to take it off the pit when you want to. I guess there's some there. Yeah, that's nice. But not when it tastes like crap.
No, I don't care.
Then yeah. So that's what that means when we talk about semi-freestone, clingstone, all that. Bonanza is a dwarf, and I think that's a semi-freestone, but it's a nice one to grow because you can grow it in a container, and it's fairly popular and easy to get. I think Desert Gold is probably the most easy. Florida Prince, not as common, but it does really well. And they say that it has larger fruit and better flavor if you have a Desert Gold around. Asian pear is a little tougher to grow here, but it'll grow here. They get up to 30 feet tall, and you should have a second one to improve your yield. They can fruit without a second one, but it's better. You're going to get much more success if you have another one around. Full to part sun, regular water. Feed this once a year. On this one, the genus Pyrus doesn't like a lot of nitrogen, so if you're feeding organically and you're feeding the way we've been talking about, you don't have to worry about this. But if you're playing around with synthetics, you might cause some fire blight on this plant, because if you have a high nitrogen fertilizer, they don't like that. So lower nitrogen. Again, if you're organic and the number's below 10, you're fine. And again, as with all rosaceae, the bees love the flowers. I like to talk about wildlife when I talk about these things, because you should be giving back as much as you're getting out of these trees. Giving back, I mean, nature. And of course, you might have to share some of the fruits with the birds. I'm not a big fan of netting, by the way, so let's just talk about that real quick, because I know someone will probably ask. When people net their fruit trees, that's like a wildlife trap, and a lot of animals die because of that netting. I'm not a fan of it. There are little things that you can buy to wrap around the individual fruits to protect them, but I'm honestly, like, I try to grow enough for nature, and if I get a few, I get some fruits off of the thing, and the birds get some, that's fine. There are some trees that are so prolific, and we'll talk about which one. I'm going to talk about my favorite ones. I'll emphasize my favorite fruit trees for here. All these ones I'm talking about now, if you're going to grow any of these things, these are all plants that people want for personal reasons, because they have a personal connection to them. Apples and peaches and Asian pears are kind of cool, very good flavor. But when you're growing these things, you're growing them almost as a novelty, because you're not going to feed yourself with these things. They're going to produce some fruit, but don't think this is you're building your ark for the end times and you're going to feed yourself off of Asian pears. Just don't think that. Shinseki is the variety for here. It's 250 to 300 chill hours. It's self-fruitful. Again, better with a friend. You're gonna have more fruit, but it is self-fruitful.
Did you
Question?
listening from Phoenix Cave Creek if you have comments specific to the area?
Yeah. So far, all the information I'm giving is appropriate for both Phoenix and Tucson. Just remember, in Phoenix, you have even less chill hours. So think below 300 or 400. As I said, with global warming, you might think 200 to 300 instead of 300 to 400, because it is getting warmer. So, but in general, like, all the same rules are going to apply. Tucson has colder nights. You have a few more chill hours than you do in Phoenix. Phoenix is going to have when it comes to tropical things, because they have less frost. And we will talk about some of those tropical things. Plum and pluot. These are prunus species. There's more than one species that are used as prunes. As plums. This is a moderate growing deciduous tree. Moderate mean speed-wise. Up to 20 feet tall, but there are many smaller varieties. And by the way, a lot of the stuff that we're talking about, sometimes it's put on dwarf rootstock. When it's a dwarf rootstock, the rootstock's going to keep that tree smaller. It's a little bit more common in citrus than it is in these fruit trees, these deciduous fruit trees, but it does occur. So just be aware of that. Sometimes you'll buy a certain variety and then it'll say a dwarf version of it. That's what it means. They put it on a rootstock, it's going to keep it smaller. Full sun for plum. It does the best in full sun. It might get a little beat up in the summer, but it'll produce better. Moderate water, fertilize before the flowers appear, just like most rosaceae. Acidification does help. What do I mean by acidification? We have very alkaline soil, so if you can apply some, I like gypsum better than soil sulfur. Soil sulfur is a little harsh and can kill some microbes in the ground. Gypsum is a little more gentle, but adding a lot of, if you add some material that's more acidic, like say your compost is heavy on the coffee grounds, then you might get some acidification out of that. Some people are creative about using things like vinegar to acidify. You can't really change the pH of your soil, but you can make pockets where nutrients are available. So that's what acidification means. And there are some organic plant foods that are more for acidic plants. And so you can use those. They're going to have a little bit more of those acidifying elements. Um, and plums do like that. So the flowers attract the bees, the fruits attract the birds. Doy. Um, so some of the best of the plums for our region and pluots. The Japanese plum is really good. It produces the largest fruit and is grown for fresh plums. It's one of the main crops they use to grow fresh plums in the United States. Santa Rosa is really good and very heat tolerant. 300 chill hours on that one. I didn't put the chill hours down for Japanese plum, but it's probably like 400 or 500 hours. The European plum is really easy to grow. I think that's 200 or 300 hours. That's more for prunes. So if you're into the prunes, that's a dried plum, and not all plums make the greatest prunes. So some species are specific for that application. The damson plum is one I have some personal experience with. They actually every other year they produce really well here. That's one I like to make preserves out of. I've grown it in the past. It's a really great old-fashioned plant. In the Midwest, they have damson plums everywhere. Do well here. The plua is 3/4 Japanese plum and 1/4 apricot. If you see that, 300 or 400 chill hours usually for those is what you want to aim for. And then flavor grenade, 300 to 400 chill hours. You do need a pollinator for that one though, so another plum or a pluet would work. All right, quince is a did I do that right? Yeah.
If you were allergic to one type of plum plant, would you be allergic to another type?
I don't know enough about. I don't know about plum allergies, so but I'm gonna guess yeah. If you're allergic to one variety, you probably are, but I don't know what you're allergic to in the plum. So different varieties have different chemical compositions, and so if there's less of that chemical that you're allergic to in another variety, it's possible that there could be one that's. But I don't know. I'm not a doctor, so you shouldn't ask me that. There are times where I will fight with doctors about botany because doctors don't know about botany. So they'll tell people they're allergic to Palo Verdes. You can't be allergic to Palo Verde. Well, you can be allergic to Palo Verde, but it has sticky pollen. So just because a plant has yellow flowers doesn't mean that you're allergic to it. I've had some arguments with doctors about that because they say, well, yeah, I've tested their blood and they're allergic to it. Yeah, you could be allergic to it, but it's not in the air, so that's not what's killing them. You got to treat them for the things that are actually suffering. Air pollinated plants that don't have sticky pollen. Anyway, I'm going off on them. It's a issue I have with that. Anyway, the quince is a really cool plant. This is where membrillo comes from. Membrillo is very popular in Sonora. This is a very important local crop. I love this plant. It's really cool. It doesn't taste that great fresh. It tastes like kind of like a chalky, bland apple. So you make them into preserves, and so you're gonna have to do a little learning about cooking and preserving. But this is a very important heritage plant. They used to be a lot more popular here when the Spanish were more here. So our region is very Spanish dominated. The Spanish were here longer. And so they left a lot of their fruit trees here, and they grew all these fruit trees here, and so anyway, this has kind of fallen by the wayside since the English have taken over this region, but Americans. But this was a very popular plant during the Spanish era, and it's a cool plant, and it does produce really well here. Full sun, moderate water, They do tend to get chlorotic, so feed with micronutrients. Low nitrogen too. They don't like. They can get blight if they're if you're bombing them with nitrogen. A very good bee plant, and they have a better yield when you have another plant. So try to have more than one, but they are self-fruitful. There's a lot of these around Bisbee, by the way. There's a ton of quince trees in Bisbee. So if you ever thought you were grabbing an apple in Bisbee and it tasted like chalk, it was a quince. The three varieties that we're mostly familiar, they're all 300 good here. Orange, pineapple, and I think it's Smyrna. But they're all used to make those preserves. You're just gonna have to play around. There's some bunch of mission varieties that are going to be coming out at Mission Gardens because it is like I said, it has a long history here. And some of those varieties predate these popular varieties that are here now. But these are the kind that you'll probably see in nurseries right now. Cherry, forget about it. The cherries won't grow here. Prunus salicifolia. It's just too hot. Even in Cochise County, we near Katie's family's house, they tried to start a cherry orchard, and it just bombed. I think they finally just bladed it. They don't. No, your parents didn't blade it. No.
No, they didn't.
Oh, did I? I didn't say that. I said near Katie's house, Katie's parents' house. Someone tried a cherry orchard. Kind of near the entrance to what is that over there? Huh? What's that corner right when you're going up into the Chiricahuas? It doesn't matter. Anyway, they don't grow here, but we have some native cherries here. We've sold some of these at the nurse. Oh, this should say black cherry is salicifolia. It's Prunus. That's wrong on the slide there. The black cherry, there's a native one here, and we've sold it at the nursery. Not Virginiana, but what's the?
I thought it was Virginiana.
No, we've sold Virginiana too. Anyway, black cherry. Oh, Serotina. It's Prunus serotina. Sorry about that. But that's one of our native ones. It's a black cherry. You don't eat these fresh, by the way. All of our native cherries you're going to make into preserves, and they're delicious as preserves, but they're not really a fresh-eating cherry. So sorry, you're not going to get that in our region. It's just too warm. But afternoon shade's the best for this, and feed before spring. Great wildlife plant, especially since it's native. It has a lot of larval. It's a larval host for a lot of butterflies and moths. So it's a really cool plant. We've sold Virginiana too, which is another native cherry to the southwest. And then another one, Prunus mexicana, is it a plum or a cherry? It doesn't matter. It's also one you make preserves out of. This is a pretty attractive tree. The leaves are a little bit more rugose or rough looking, and really beautiful bloomer in the spring. This is one of my favorite trees in terms of this group, and we've sold this one before too. So of course, it's a great wildlife plant. So again, afternoon shade for both of these, for all the Prunus species, the cherry-related plants that are native. The Asian persimmons, this is another one, forget about it. In the low desert, it's just not, it's too hot here, they don't like it. But we have our own Diosporous species that are native to the southwest. There's one from Baja California too that I can't remember the species of, but this is the one you'll find more often, and this is one we're growing, Diosporous texana, native to Texas. The fruits are, the flavor is a little bit like a persimmon, but the texture is a little softer. It's almost like a texture of a plum, even softer than a plum really. But anyway, this grows really well here. Our trees fruit every year here. We had so many fruits this year, which I saved for seed. But they're small little purple fruits, about the size of a small plum, and it's semi-evergreen in Arizona. In Texas, where it's a little colder, it'll drop all its leaves. Very mottled, beautiful-looking bark that looks a lot like a crepe myrtle tree. Have you ever seen the bark of a crepe myrtle tree? It looks like that a little bit. Full sun, hardy enough here, down to 15 degrees. Really cool plants. So we're trying to make these available. Unfortunately, they're dioecious, which means there's males and females, and that means we have to grow them and sex them out. So it's going to take a little long. We have to get them up at least into a 5-gallon before we can sell them, because we want to sell them as male and female, so people actually can get some fruits. So you do need a male and female on this. Elderberry, another native plant. Now the elderberries we're talking about are not the European elderberries. The elderberries that grow here, there's around 4 species, but it's a moderate to rapid grower. The plants that we're mostly growing are Sambucus nigra, but we'll talk about the other ones too. But nigra is the most common one. There's a lot of mix up about the taxonomy on these guys. There's what they called Mexicana, which I think is a subspecies of nigra now, or maybe it's a subspecies of cerula. I can't remember. But I actually have had a hard time keeping this straight because they've changed it a lot. But the point is that they do pretty good down here. The Mexican elderberry is the one you'll see the most here, and it's the one that grows down in Patagonia, along the Santa Cruz River down. If you follow the Santa Cruz River down, they become really prevalent. They used to be prevalent along the Santa Cruz here, but it's gotten a little hotter, and of course we destroyed the Santa Cruz, so they're not as common anymore, but they used to be prevalent along the wash that used to be a river. So this plant is summer deciduous here. So it's funny, if you live in a higher elevation and it's colder, it's a winter deciduous plant. The low desert, it's a summer deciduous plant. They get yellow and sick looking in the summer. There's nothing wrong with your tree. It's just that's what they do here. And so they take a break and they go to sleep in the summer, and they get yellow and kind of rough looking. I do think that they're a little bit better with afternoon shade in the low desert, especially in Tucson, especially in Phoenix. A second plant is a good idea if you really want fruit. They pollinate much better with a second plant around. They're not dioecious, so you don't have males and females, but having a second plant around is a good idea. A very, very, one of the best wildlife plants you can plant because of the fruit, because of the flowers are nectar rich. Hummingbirds are famous for using this as a nesting tree, so a fantastic wildlife plant. So the 4 species are cerula, nigra, canadensis, and racemosa. I have 3 of the 4 in here: nigra, cerula, and racemosa. That red one is racemosa, and you see that, like, we've collected fruit off of this plant in the dragoons. So you see it in Foothill, and pretty dry. That area is pretty dry and hot. It's not as hot as Tucson, but I think this plant's going to do well here. But I've never seen it grown here, so it's something that we want to introduce and try out. But it grows in a hotter area than I've seen nigra growing in, so and drier. So and it is one that is edible if you make preserves out of it. But it's a little different than the more blue or purple fruits of nigra or cerula. And canadensis is one that you find up in the mountains. That one is we saw canadensis this summer when we went to Mount Graham. Lots of fruits, big leaves, real big leaves. Not something that's going to do as well down here. That's why I didn't put it in the picture, because the leaves are giant, and it probably loses a lot of water in the summer. Fig, definitely grow this plant. If you got room, grow a fig. Such a great producing plant, such a great wildlife plant. Almost all figs do well here. Some people have told me that they've had trouble with them in the past, trying to grow them, and we'll talk a little bit about what might be going on. They do, especially in their first like 2 or 3 years of life, really want a lot of water, because they got giant leaves, and those leaves aren't really built for not letting go of water. So in the first few years of a fig's life, sometimes they get kind of burnt and crispy looking. Most of that damage is cosmetic, and so if you can put aside your aesthetic demands on the plant, it's probably doing fine. Just keep it well watered. Definitely when you plant these things, amend the soil really well. But all that said, we've found so many old fig trees and all these old haciendas and just old farms that have lasted for 100 or more years, and they're still growing. And sometimes they die to the ground and they come back. The figs are incredibly tough. They're very forgiving. So grow a fig. They're really great plants. even though in our yard we have a lot of wildlife, a lot of birds, and we get the fig beetles. They're these big green scarab beetle of the fruit as well. We're sharing with all those guys, and we still had more fruits than we could eat. And we only have 2 fig trees. We have a Black Mission, and we have what they call the Chicago Hardy. But we had more figs than we knew what to do with, and that was sharing a lot. So I highly recommend having a fig tree. They're really great plants. They're also attractive. They have thick, chunky looking. It's a ficus. Ficus are cool. Ficus are tropical, subtropical trees. The strangler fig from the tropics that strangles trees, that's a ficus. The fiddle-leaf fig in your house that is a house plant's a ficus. They're related. They're all in the Moraceae. And anyway, ficus is a cool genus. It's got really big leaves. It's deciduous and does drop its leaves in the wintertime. The tips of if there was a lot of growth right before the frost, you might get some frost damage on the tips of the plant. But most of the time they don't freeze back that much in our region. What else? It is self-pollinating, so that's cool. You don't have to have more than one. One's just fine. They grow well in full sun. A little afternoon shade is fine. I've talked about the burning leaves thing. After that 3rd year, they really stop doing that. It's the first few years that they look kind of rough and beat up. So that's just remember that, and just keep taking good care of it. But figs are awesome, and there's a bazillion varieties. I literally whittled it down a lot. There's a bunch of varieties that are based on flavor, and they have like the the cherry hinted flavors, and then they have like the caramel hinted flavors. There's about, I don't know, like 10 flavor categories for figs. But anyway, the ones that I have personal experience with are listed here. Cadota, that's the white one. We need a Cadota. Oh, I don't know where we'll put another
I don't
fig.
know where we'd put it.
We ain't got room. But Cadota is a good white-fleshed one, very honey-like flavor. Mount Etna or Chicago Hardy, Marseille, that's a very strong flavored one. They call it the punchberry group. But it's a smaller fruit, but really good flavor. The tree's a little smaller too, even though all these are saying that they grow to 30 feet tall. This climate, I think it's going to be a much smaller tree. But and ours is, and it doesn't grow as fast as the black mission. Brown turkey is another really good one. That's a nice sugary flavored one. And Desert King is another one that you see in the trade. It does need the pollination by the fig wasp, and I don't know if we have that fig wasp here, but I've never seen us having an issue with pollination. But there are places where they don't have the pollinator for the fig, and some fig varieties have to have that wasp, and if they don't have them, they won't get fruit. I don't think we have that problem here. But question:
when watering figs, do they prefer a deep water a couple times a week or more consistent shallow watering? Deep, right?
Deep, yeah. But in the beginning, as with all plants, you're going to have to water it every day. But after it's established, an established tree, of course, and this is true about all trees, really, but good deep watering about once or twice a week is probably the way to go. Some mulch doesn't hurt to slow down the evaporation of the water. And the other thing that we don't talk about it that much when we talk about planting things, but is like what else is growing around it and all that. And as the tree gets older, they start to shade their own roots, and there's sometimes if a plant's in the shade for a while and then it grows like our big tree actually gets afternoon shade, but now it doesn't because it's growing over the roof, and so it gets full sun up there now, and that's something. So sometimes the exposure changes, but also the roots are in the shade, and it's also big enough to where it's shading itself. That impacts how much you need to water it and how you water it, and so it's hard to talk about that in all in one thing. But anyway, just watering deep is always better. You have to deal with your own soil type, and is it grown in a container? If you're growing in a container, you have to water every day. If it's a raised bed, again, you're going to have to water a lot more often. Raised beds dry out more often, so it depends on the situation. Cool. So pomegranate, another highly recommended plant for this region, another heritage tree for our region. Pomegranates and quinces and figs are part of the plants that helped us get that designation of the city of gastronomy for UNESCO. The long history of the Spanish introductions, anyway. Not the only thing, but part of the reason we got that. Pomegranate is a cool plant. It's in the Lythraceae, which is, if you know what Kufia is, like the bat-faced Kufia, same family. Weird, right? I don't know this family very well. It's mostly, I think, a tropical family, but anyway, Punica granatum. It's a moderate growing plant, and can be trained as a tree. I don't recommend it, but people love to train things in the trees. 15 feet is usual, but they can get bigger. It is self-pollinating. Having another one around will give you more fruit. So if you've had a plant for a while and you only get 1 or 2 fruit off it every year, try to find some space for another one. Full sun is the best if you want good fruits. Moderate water. Don't water during flowering. That's what they say. I don't know if I've paid attention enough, but don't flood it when it's flowering. Not that to not water it, but just like if it's on irrigation, don't worry about it. But they say that while it's flowering, it's a good idea to hold back the water a little bit if the plant's established, not if it's brand new. But they have really cool looking flowers. It looks like a carnation almost, like stuffed inside of a baby pomegranate, and then the baby pomegranate grows and becomes a big one. So it's kind of a cool looking plant. Feed just before the plants leaf out if you feed them. And they attract butterflies, bees, hummingbirds, birds. This is a really good wildlife plant. Really easy to grow. They have pomegranate festival every year in Ajo. Ajo is hotter than here. It's Oregon Pipe National Monument, and they have a pomegranate festival. They grow a lot of pomegranates down there, and this is one of those trees they always find on the old haciendas or homesteads. They live for a long time. They're tough plants, really cool plant, and you just have to learn how to use it. You might not be acquainted with how to cook or eat pomegranates. I mean, it's not just about eating them fresh, because a lot of people don't really bother with that. You learn how to use them and how to apply them to salads and recipes, making sauces out of them and stuff like that. This is one of those plants that'll teach you how to be a good cook. There are a lot of pomegranate varieties too. I'm not going to go over all these. Wonderful is the one you find the most. Wonderful is if you find one that's not labeled, it's probably a wonderful. Most of the heritage varieties that they found in the haciendas are related to wonderful. It's a good one. But there's a lot of varieties, and you can look them up. I highly recommend the wonderful. It's a good one. Jujube. This plant came here with the Chinese. And there are different species. We're gonna kind of go over them, but this species, Ziziphus jujuba, is the jujube. It's a kind of an unusual fruit, a little bit like a date when it's fully ripe, kind of sugary and delicious. There are some varieties that are grown for other purposes. Some of them are better dried out, but again, when you're buying a jujube, look up the variety that you're buying. They are hard to find, especially in Tucson and Phoenix, but they grow really well here and they last forever. They sucker and grove. So if you know what Ailanthus, tree of heaven, does, it does the same thing. It suckers trees. I don't know if all the varieties do this, but I think any tree that's going to be around a long time, it'll start to sucker. They're pretty tough. You only got to feed them once a year before flowering. They can grow in full sun. Some cultivars are self-fruitful. It's always good to have another one. Sometimes with these, what am I trying to say? Never mind. Okay, so let's go over this. The varieties that you usually find of this species, Ziziphus jujuba, is Li and Lang, and they're good together. They're most readily available, and they have low chill hours. They're good for fresh or for drying. So these are the two that you mostly find in Tucson. However, there's a few others that we'll talk about. This is one we sold this year. We're all sold out of them right now, but the Christ thorn jujube, it's a little smaller of a fruit and drier, but it makes good preserves and it is good dried. It's evergreen, so that's kind of cool. In its native environment, it gets really big, but here it's like more 20 to 30 feet. Very tough, full sun. It's hardy down to -10. Actually, I think it's hardy down to 10, but incredibly hardy. We don't ever have to worry about the cold here. It's a really great wildlife plant. It's really thorny, which is why they call it Christ thorn.
Whoa.
Yeah. Yeah, it was kind of a pain in the ass in the nursery because we got
It was just like
you got stabbed.
Ripped something.
This one, you may find it, maybe. It's actually better for our climate here, but we don't see it very often. This is Ziziphus martiana, and it's an arid land jujube. It tolerates most of the conditions that the other jujubes tolerate. There's many varieties. It's just hard to get them here. So far. So we'll see about this, and we'll look into this ourselves and see if we can get the Indian jujube here. But this is a harder plant to get. And of course, if you know graythorn, that is Ziziphus too. This is our own jujube. I don't know if I would call the fruit jujube-like. It's a much smaller berry-like fruit, but it is edible and delicious. Better made into preserves, and of course, it's a great wildlife plant. So we talked about the native edible plants in our native edible plant class, but I do like to bring these up just so you know what's related to what, related to our own region. So loquat, I love this plant. This is another really cool plant, and it's got a long heritage here as well because of the Chinese. They used to use the leaves for lung problems. It's like a medicinal plant, but they ate the fruit, of course, as well. It's evergreen. It definitely doesn't look like it belongs here, but it actually does pretty well here. Afternoon shade, I think, is better for it. They can take full sun, but they get the burning on the edges of the leaves. And But it is a big leafed plant and does need fairly regular water. If there are if there's new growth and you get a sudden drop of temperature like a frost, you can get some frost damage on them sometimes, but they're hardy down to at least 15 degrees. You will lose some flowers if there are flowers on the plant because it does like to bloom in the cool season. So you'll lose them in the 20s, and lose fruit as well. This is a plant that you often see in Tucson growing up in a kind of a protected courtyard or on an east-facing wall. Not because it's all that frost tender, but more the summer sun will beat it up too. There are some mission garden varieties that are going to come out, including one that can grow in full sun and not burn on the edges of the leaves. So we're working on making that available, but it's a cool plant. Fertilize once a month, and in the warm season, and they do like their micronutrients. So use like a citrus type food or just micronutrients. Big Jim and Champagne are the two varieties that you find the most. There are unnamed Tucson varieties that are often grown in Tucson that fruit well here, but nobody knows what they're called. It's just that the nurseries grow that, and honestly, that's what we've been growing are those varieties. So we were growing varieties that are clones of varieties that have lasted in Tucson for a long time. So I think this coming year, though, we're going to have some selected varieties that are going to be named, so we know what we're getting. But anyway, loquats are cool, and they're fairly easy to grow. This is a plant that you might find a little bit more in Phoenix than in Tucson. It's in the Moraceae, so that's the mulberry family, and there's a lot of other plants in this family that we're going to talk about. We're kind of going to go down a Moraceae mulberry family section here, I guess you could say. Figs are in the Moraceae, so that's what we've talked about so far. This is just a weird plant. It's evergreen, grows up to 25 feet tall. In terms of self-pollination, the one thing you struggle with here is that if you bring in more than one plant, you'll get more fruit, but you might get more seeds. So that's something you kind of have to like balance out with this species. They say to feed it about 3 times a year, full sun. I've never grown this plant myself, so this one, I know people who have grown this plant, and the main thing is protecting it from the afternoon sun. I think it's best. The 2 varieties that you'll find are the Darrow melonberry and the Norris mandarin melonberry, and they're both going to be seedless unless there's a male around. Now, this plant might look familiar to you because it's related to this plant, and this is one you will see uh, fairly often on the old homesteads. Back in because of Franklin D. Roosevelt, there's this period where they were planting all these plants to bring down erosion. It was in response to one of the times where we had these agricultural practices that just caused terrible weather, dust, Dust Bowl era. So the response to a lot of that was to plant as many plants as possible to bring erosion down, and that's why this plant was planted so often. The fruit's not edible. The most common use of the fruit that I know of is kids toss them at each other. But no, it's more of a hedgerow plant, and you find them on all the old farms. There's a lot of persisting plants. Your parents have one of these in their yard. But you find them on all the old farms and in ranches and stuff. So yeah, you may come across this tree. I just put it in here because it's related to this guy, but it's not edible. But it's kind of a cool looking plant, and if you have one around, keep it alive. It's got a lot of history to it. They're not a weed or anything, but there's just a lot of old persisting plants around. Now, back to the conversation about allergies. These three plants in this picture here were banned from Tucson, and they say it was because of pollen. Bermuda grass, olive trees, and mulberries. What I heard, I did some research on this subject, and what I heard is there was a mayor at the time who had a neighbor whose mulberries and olives are making a mess of the sidewalk or something, and he was really pissed off about it, and he got the county to ban these plants from Tucson, and they said because of pollen. Interestingly enough, Bermuda grass never stopped being sold. You can still buy wild Bermuda grass seed. You can still buy sod. The sod is usually a hybrid, and they usually bloom less, so that's probably why that was allowed. But you can still buy the seed, and the seed is just a weedy Bermuda grass, and I don't even know why anyone would plant that anyway. But it's funny because that is actually a huge allergy problem. Olive trees and mulberries, they are wind pollinated, but let me just say this. Back in the 1800s, when people moved here to escape their allergy problems, the late 1800s through the early 1900s, Tucson was a mecca for allergy people, people who suffered so greatly from the allergies they couldn't live. So they moved to the desert where there was so much less pollen. And during that time, we were growing more mulberries and olive trees than ever, but they still didn't cause the people who suffered from their allergies that much turmoil. And it's because they're not that bad, but it just they got a bad rap, and it's people don't really understand allergies that much because they don't understand ecology. The reason that allergies have become so bad in recent years, and they have gotten worse, after mulberries and olive trees got banned, and Bermuda grass too, but not really. What happened over the course of the next 30 years is that we had a lot more soil disturbance. And when you have soil disturbance, you have pioneer plants, which are mostly weedy plants that are wind pollinated. And especially those grasses. And I'm not talking, the native grasses aren't the ones that usually come in. It's usually Bermuda grass or buffalo grass, all these weedy, high pollen producing plants. Anyway, that's what's causing the pollen issues for most people, and dust, and mold spores. And now, with what's going on now in California, we're breathing in, the redwood forest. But sad note there. But anyway, mulberries and olive trees, I think, are going to get legalized again in Tucson. and some people are selling them anyway. But there are some at Mission Garden too, by the way. They're growing them there, and they got a pass on it because there are heritage trees. And I made an argument with a whole bunch of other nurseries to get these off the ban list because it's stupid that these are illegal. They're part of our heritage. They're part of the reason we got the UNESCO City of Gastronomy. So it's a shame that we can't grow these here. Let's go into them. Mulberries, Morris species. Again, this is the same family as these guys, right? But it's more of a berry type of fruit. If you look really close to those fruits, you can kind of see it, right? Maybe not the fig so much, but this does kind of look like those other fruits, maybe, if you apply a lot of creativity. Mulberries can live for 1,000,000 years. Okay, 1,000 years, but a long time. And they're deciduous, they're fast-growing trees, and different cultivars and different species grow up to different heights. But a lot of them get about 50 feet tall. They're big trees. And mulberries, by the way, they're not illegal everywhere. I don't know about Phoenix right now, but I know Pima County has made them illegal. That is up in the air right now. As I said, we've been debating that right now. We're trying to get that changed. So there are some cultivars that need a second tree as a pollinator and some that don't. We're going to go over that. But and then again, the same thing that some of them will get seedier if there is a pollen plant around, if a male. A lot of mulberries are, I think maybe all of them are dioecious. So male, female, separate plants. And you're going to feed them once a year. They do like their micronutrients, so citrus food would work on this just fine. The black mulberry is one of my favorites, Morix nigra. It doesn't hybridize. It cannot hybridize with the other mulberries. Some of the mulberry selections that are out there are hybrids between the Persian and the white mulberry, which we'll go into. But these have a totally different set of chromosomes, different numbers of chromosomes, so they don't hybridize. These are self-pollinating. And I know someone who might have sold some of these trees this year. White mulberry. This is the old trees that are all over Tucson. This is the one you find coming up as a volunteer in your yard, planted by a bird probably. But all the old trees, especially in the Spanish parts of town, downtown, South Tucson, old parts of town will often have a white mulberry grown. It's the most common planted mulberry before the ban. And only the new fruits are usually white. There are some cultivars where the fruits stay white, but they're still going to turn, most of them are going to turn red or black. But they call it the white mulberry because at least when they first come out, they're white. I still need you to manage the questions, okay, honey. White mulberry is the preferred feedstock for silkworms. So if you're getting into the silk industry and you want to raise some silkworms, that's what they use. By the way, on the subject of the white mulberry, you might have seen this, and hopefully you've never done this. This is called pollarding, and it is it's an old agricultural practice. It was used to make baskets because you got those long whippy sticks. It was also used to create a lot more branching fruits, or a lot more branches with fruits. But every time you do this, the life of that tree is like halved. So like it's an old, and it was done as an aesthetic thing because people just got used to it. They did it in regions of Spain where they were probably growing silkworms. I don't know, but at any rate, it became sort of an aesthetic. It's ugly. Don't do this. It's terrible for the tree. But I just wanted to bring this up when I brought up the white mulberry because you do see this and people ask about this. And they treat other trees this way too. Don't ever train a tree this. Don't ever do this to a tree. This is awful. Anyway, the Persian mulberry. This is probably one of my favorites. This is self-pollinating. It's a little bit more cold tolerant than the other two, um, so you can get down to zone 8. Um, but but a really nice plant, long fruits, really attractive plant. This is another one of those trees that were planted back in the day as a hedgerow, or sometimes just planted. The nurseries used to sell this plant too. This is called the paper mulberry. You don't see it in the nurseries anymore, but you see old trees in town. I've seen them. I've seen them around Tucson, and I've definitely seen them on the old farms and stuff. Um, it's not an edible plant. It's in the Moraceae. It's kind of like that Osage orange. This one's a little of a taller tree, um, and they call it paper mulberry because they actually made paper out of it. It's made to make it's used to make that famous washi paper in Japan. So that's its history. It's got those weird looking flowers. But anyway, I just put this in there because you might come across it.
Isn't that one potentially a weed?
Not here.
But
in other places it is, yeah. But not in Arizona. It's too dry. But this one does sucker though. I'm glad you brought that up. This suckers, and it can create a grove much like Sapindus does, the soapberry, or we said jujube before. Jujube does that too. Ailanthus, tree of heaven, they sucker, so they make new trees around them. So this tree does that. Goji berry, Lycium. There's 2 species, Barbarum and Chinense. These are the goji berry, the superfood that everyone's crazy about. It's self-fruitful. It's really easy to grow here. We've sold lots of these this year. It's summer deciduous and briefly winter deciduous in Tucson. Sometimes they won't drop their leaves in the winter in Tucson, depending on how protected they are. This is a giant shrub. It's like eventually gets about 8 feet tall and 10 or 12 feet wide, just like our species of wolfberries. Lycium fremontii, Lycium exertum, Lycium brevipies. There's many species of mulberries in Arizona and the Southwest U.S. and northern Mexico. They're all edible. They're all goji berries. They all have the same qualities. They don't all taste the same, but in terms of like that superfood quality, they're all good. I like making preserves. That we made that wolfberry like
I forget what it's called.
Not preserved. We didn't make a jelly out of it. We just made like a you forgot the word.
Simple syrup.
Yeah, it's like a syrup. Yeah, syrup is the word. Yeah. We made a syrup out of it for cocktails, and it was delicious and totally its own flavor. Highly recommend doing that. Goji berry is cool too, so try to grow it. It's not that hard to grow. People say that it's hard. It's not. It's really easy to grow. Afternoon shade's probably a good idea, or filtered sun under the edge of a mesquite is a good location for it. Question.
Recently heard about good things about the Shangri-La mulberry trees. Illegal though too.
Yeah, still illegal. Yeah, true. So, yeah, like I said, that'll hopefully change, and actually we should call and ask about that.
Yeah.
But we did submit our plea to change those rules. There are a lot of varieties within those species. There's other species too. I can't believe I didn't put in our native mulberry in there. We have a native mulberry too, Morus microphylla. Small fruits, but edible and dioecious. You need a male and female. So not self-fruitful. You have to get a male and female. But a really good wildlife plant. Yeah, I can't believe I didn't put that in there. I did talk about it in our native food plant class. But Vitis vinifera, the grape. There's a lot of Vitis grown in southern Arizona. We have wine country here in the Sonoyta area and then in Cochise County. Um, but of course, there are the table grapes too. The grapes you eat for fruit as opposed to making it into wine. They do really well here. They're easy to grow. They're deciduous. They can climb very high. You don't have to prune them like they do in the wineries. They have a very specific thing that they're doing. Their pruning methods are meant to drive the sugar levels up to a certain level, and so anyway, you don't have to grow grapes and prune them like they do in the wineries. They have a very different goal. So you can let this grow over things and over an arbor and create you some shade. Um, the We've grown the Flame and the Thompson. I feel like there's another variety too, um, but yeah, there are lots of varieties that do well here. Most you will have to deal with this grape leaf skeletonizer in the summertime, which turns your leaves into skeletons. It's a cool moth, and it doesn't kill the plant. You know, the plant will do fine if you just let it be. They'll grow new leaves. I'm constantly grabbing leaves because our tortoises love grape leaves. It's really good tortoise food, by the way.
They also love mulberry leaves.
And they love mulberries too, yeah. Tortoises do. But anyway, we're constantly pulling leaves off of our grapes on our landscape, and they don't seem to care at all. They just grow new branches and new leaves, so you don't have to worry about that. But anyway, most of these plants have evolved with these herbivores. They know how to deal with it, so it's not an issue. But people spray things to stop that from happening. There are several native species of Vitis in our region. We have Vitis arizonica, the species in California, Texas, New Mexico, and Arizona, and Utah and California. Utah and Colorado. They all do well here. And so you can grow any of those too. They all have edible fruits. Some are better than others. The native varieties of grapes tend to be more tart, or sometimes better just made into preserves. They're all good wildlife plants. The passion fruit is really easy to grow here. They fruit well here. The main things you're going to be dealing with are the frost and the caterpillars, which we like. But passion flowers grow back readily. In fact, Bisbee is almost overtaken by passion flowers. I think it's Cerula, Passiflora cerula, that's all over Bisbee. So it's cold there, right? Much colder than here, but they freeze back and they come back. All passion flowers are appropriate for here in Arizona. In Tucson, definitely in Phoenix. In Phoenix, they'll often be evergreen. It's definitely good to get them kind of get them going before the caterpillars hit them. Sometimes, if the plant's like a brand new 1 gallon and they get covered in those caterpillars, and we'll talk about those, they will sometimes not come back. We had 2 plants of edulus that we planted, and one came back and one didn't after the feeding. The one that was in the ground in sort of crappy soil that I didn't work too hard on was the one that didn't come back. So you could say that I just didn't do my job there. The one that was growing in a container and it was fed a lot better came back with a vengeance. So the butterflies, oh gosh, Katie, the butterfly. Gulf fritillary, one of the most beautiful butterflies. The Gulf fritillary uses it as a larval food plant. You'll get those orange caterpillars. Sometimes they're like on the black side when they're orange and spiky looking. They're really cool. They can defoliate an entire vine. The vine almost always grows back. Like I said, only when they're like little, and maybe there's other things going on. They're not that healthy that they won't come back. Edulous and Incarnata and Cerula are the three main flower. Oh, I got a slide for that. The three main flowering ones fruiting ones that produce the passion fruit, and they all do well here. They're all easy to grow. And look at these flowers. I haven't even been talking about the flowers.
Oh my God.
Look at these flowers. They're amazing. We have some blooming right now in our front yard of Edulous, and just gorgeous. And so, anyway, feeding an organic fertilizer once in a while is fine. They don't seem to really need to be fed that often. They're very, very fast growers. This is not a tough plant to grow. So it is best that their roots are in the shade, and then they can take full sun if they have their roots in the shade. Or part sun's really good, or you can grow them under a mesquite tree. They seem to flower and fruit as long as there's some sun, if some filtered sun or some full sun. We also have several native passion flowers that are edible, but maybe not delicious. They're just edible. We have at least three, if I remember right. Mexicana, fetida, which is now called Arizonica, and Cimbroides, that you find at least in southern Arizona. So the fruits they don't have a lot of flesh to them. They're kind of mucilaginous, so edible, but is it palatable? Probably not. Guava. Surprisingly, this is a heritage tree here because the Spanish brought them here and they grew them. They are frost tender and they had to, grow them in the courtyards and stuff, but they grew them. And there are Mission Garden varieties of these available. This is a tree up to around 15 feet tall. There's some old trees on campus still, maybe. I haven't looked around lately, but there used to be some guavas on campus, and they had been there a long time. They might still be there. I don't know. There's a lot of really cool plants on campus that used to be there, and they're not anymore because of all the development. But anyway. Three times a year about for fertilizing this guy, and obviously you protect it from frost. 20. They say that, if it's going to freeze, cover it. Mature trees can take a little more frost than the younger trees. But of course, the new growth is going to get damaged. Just have a plan for protection. Grow it on a south or east facing wall, and if you can build a little box around it to protect it, that would be great. There's a couple of varieties listed there, the Hawaiian Pink Supreme or the Mexican Cream varieties. But any of the varieties you find sold in Arizona are probably going to be good for here. Pineapple guava is in the Myrtaceae, so they're related, right? The Myrtaceae myrtle is a Myrtaceae. A lot of Australian plants are Myrtaceae. Myrtaceae is very big in Australia. Pineapple guava is a shrub, and what's funny about this plant is it's often grown as an ornamental, particularly in Phoenix, because I don't know why. I don't know why Phoenix has so much more of these kind of plants. I guess they just grow a lot more non-native stuff, but you do see them in Tucson too. And back in the 80s and 90s is when you saw a lot of them sold as shrubs. And they're cool looking plants. They got glossy green on the top and then kind of whitish, silverish on the bottom of the leaf. So it's like a two-tone leaf. And look at those flowers. They're really cool looking flowers. Those flowers are edible as well, by the way. But the fruit is like a little guava. And so it's a shrub. They can be trees after a long time. They have like this kind of cool, shaggy, peely bark. And then so the two varieties that are listed there are the self-fruitful varieties that I recommend. Most nurseries that sell this plant don't know what they got. Most of the varieties that are sold in the nursery trade are self-fruitful, but you should have. It's nice to have another plant. It's that same rule. you're going to have more fruits if you have more than one plant. Uh, but they are self-fruitful. The but the ones that are in the landscape trade have been grown asexually for so long, and nobody remembers what they grew originally, because they weren't growing them for the fruit; they were just growing them as a shrub. So, but cool plant. Um, Wax jambu. This is another myrtaceous plant, just a weirdo. This plant is related to clove. This is something that you'll find more in Phoenix and Tucson, and more opportunity to grow it in Phoenix and Tucson because it doesn't really want to go below 28 degrees. Um, and that's as an adult. I would not subject this thing to any frost at all. Um, but I just put this in here because I think it's cool. It's related to clove. I would love to grow a clove plant. I don't think clove will do very well here at all. They really probably need a lot more humidity than we have. This one you want to feed with, definitely make sure it has its micronutrients, because it does go chlorotic. It does get micronutrient deficient. Mango. So here we are. Someone was asking about mango. So this is a very fast growing tree, 10 to 60 feet tall. Not 60 feet in Tucson. Maybe if it's protected. I feel like there was a mango on campus a while ago, but I can't remember. There have been throughout the years some mango trees in and around Tucson, mostly Mexican families actually, growing mango or papaya, because they just used to doing that at home, and they did it here and they kept them alive. It's self-pollinating, and definitely frost tender. You're going to feed, this is a heavy feeder, so feed it every month during the warm season. Don't feed it in the winter, because the more new growth it has on it, the more likely it's going to suffer from the cold. This doesn't love a lot of winter moisture either. It's not as picky as papaya. They really don't want winter moisture, which we'll talk about. Papaya. So mango trees kind of look like a tree. I didn't really put a good picture in here, but they look like a tree, maybe like an avocado tree they'll remind you of. But papayas are weird. They look like palms almost. There used to be this woman in Barrio Hollywood who had a big tree of this for a while. So this is something you're going to grow just because you're going to have some fun and grow a papaya. I mean, you can germinate those seeds. I've done it. They're really easy to germinate if you go to the grocery store and buy a papaya. It's almost like a succulent. I mean, especially when they're young, they look like just weird. There's just like weird succulent plants with these divided palmate leaves, and here maybe 10 feet tall. I don't know. The plant I remember, this is back in the 90s. I remember that plant, but it was about 10 feet tall. They can get to be about 15 feet tall, I guess, here. But pollination depends on the cultivar. If you know what it is, if you didn't just grow it from a seed, I mean, if you grow it from a seed, it's going to not be the parent, because it's going to be a combination of whatever the parents were. They don't like cold, of course, so they stop growing under 65 degrees. So they'll slow down. During that time, don't water it. Unless it's a brand new plant. If it's like you just planted it, you'll have to water it. But once it's established and it's been in the ground for a while, or if it's in a container, you are going to water it a lot less, because it's just so prone to rotting. Because plants, when they're not growing, and if they're semi-succulent, like this plant is, the combination of being dormant and having a lot of water is death. So be careful about that. They like really well-drained soil. You're going to water them in the growing season. You're going to water them monthly. Then you won't. You're going to feed them monthly, but you're not going to feed them a lot in the wintertime. Anyway, papaya. White sapote. This is a cool plant that is very, very common. If you just go right past the border, it's all over Sonora. but it doesn't occur. It's not here very often. It tastes like custard. It's a really cool plant. Um, there are a couple of old trees in Tucson. There's this one tree that I was tracking for a long time, kind of uh, not quite midtown. Gosh, I don't even remember what street that was on. It was just north of Speedway, maybe on um, Helen or Mabel, but down past Campbell. I can't remember. I have to like scratch my brain a little bit more and remember. But there was a big 30-foot tree, I think, that I was keeping track of for a while. So this is in the Rutaceae. That's the citrus family. It's evergreen in our climate unless it gets really cold. You're going to protect this from the frost. Although that plant that I was keeping track of was not protected, but it was on the south side of a house. So it was in a sort of a microclimate, and it wasn't in a particularly cold neighborhood. Um, this is a cool plant that if you have some personal history with, that you probably want in your yard if you have the space. It's a very nostalgic plant for anyone who's very connected to Mexico. There's a lot of them in Mexico, and it's almost as heavy a feeder as the mango. So maybe not every month, but maybe every other month. Um, Avocado. Everyone wants to grow an avocado, and everyone's tried probably. Um, if you grow an avocado from a seed, you're just not going to get what you tried to grow because it's again you're growing a seed from a hybrid, so you're going to have some combination of the genetics of the parents, but not the same as what you grew. So if you're trying to grow a fruiting avocado, I would try to stick with the named varieties that you can find sometimes. One of the things that I have a friend who's growing avocados in a sort of a, it's not really a greenhouse. It's not heated, but it is clear above. So it's a totally enclosed area, and there's glass above, so it is bright in there. But it's a dwarf, and that's something that changed my mind. Like, oh, maybe you could grow some avocados here, and if you got a dwarf variety, and you could take really good care of it. The problem with avocados, they're not even that frost tender, actually. It's just that they flower in the wintertime, and so those cold temperatures that might not damage a plant will knock the flowers off, and so you won't have fruits. There was an old tree not too far from Time Market, kind of in between some old houses, and it's probably still there. God knows what that was when they planted it. It was probably something someone grew just like anybody else. I don't think I ever saw that thing fruit. But you might want to try. Avocados are kind of cool. Natal plum, another phoenix plant. It's a shrub in Phoenix. There's some different varieties of this. There's like a prostrate, low-growing one. But anyway, Carissa macrocarpa. It's in the milkweed family, Apocynaceae, but it has an edible fruit. The fruit's kind of it's kind of tart and has that chalky texture a little bit, but it's actually pretty good, and it'll grow here. It's a little frost tender, but it's a shrub and it's easy to protect. In Phoenix, it's a lot warmer, so a lot of people have this plant, and so you can walk around Phoenix and pluck them off the trees and eat them. And it's fairly easy to grow, full sun, moderate water. If you're trying to get it to bloom, feed it. But it's going to have a little bit of frost damage at 30 degrees, but it can take down to like 25 with some damage and grow back from it. This plant attracts a lot of pollinators, by the way, so nice for that. It's only about a foot or so tall, up to 3 feet if you get the varieties that are not dwarf. Moringa, the horseradish tree. So this is one of those plants that people want to that they say that's going to save the world, because in the world's getting more arid all over, and we need plants that grow fast and that are perennial. So this is one of those plants that they say is going to change the food chain a little bit. You eat the leaves mostly, although the entire plant's edible. The pods are made into food. But the leaves are what most people eat. It's a really fast growing tree. There used to be some old trees on campus. Again, I don't know if they're still alive, but they were about 30 feet tall, I guess. They're frost tender though, so they will get knocked back at below 30. Below 30 degrees, you're going to get some damage on them. But the thing is most people grow this as a shrub anyway because they want more foliage. So even if it doesn't freeze, they'll whack them back. They'll prune them back so that they grow back with all these suckers. And so that's probably the most economical way to grow it if you're growing it for food. Ironically enough, I was growing this genus Moringa as caudiciforms because it's a caudiciform or a pachycul tree, which means that they get these fat, swollen trunks. And so that was my experience with Moringa before I found out about it as a food. People eat it raw or cooked. I have not played around with, as much as I've grown this over the years, I have not yet played around with eating this. So it's something I need to try. I haven't gotten around to it yet. Olive trees. One of our heritage trees, evergreen, easy to grow, slow growing or moderate. If you provide some nutrients to this thing, it'll take it and grow, but it doesn't need food. It's such a tough. There's a reason this plant became such an important food in the Mediterranean. It doesn't need anything. It doesn't need any love, and they just grow and they produce fruit. And so these are fun trees to grow, and they're gorgeous trunks, the gorgeous fat, and they get all those ropey growths at the base of the tree. You've seen those old trees before, I'm sure. There's a ton of them on campus and in the old neighborhoods. The main thing is that they just need good drainage, and most are pretty. If you have two, you're going to have more fruits, but there's enough trees in town where you'll probably get fruits even if you only plant one. And what else? These are the varieties that we usually find here. Arbequina, Manzanillo, and Mission. I've grown Manzanillo and Mission. The Arbequina is a little bit more tender because it does have damage at 25 degrees. But that apparently it's a nicer oil plant, so that's why you would, if you're making olive oil, you probably want to grow that and grow it in an area that's not as cold. But the Mission and the Manzanillo or Manzanilla, those are the varieties that you're going to find the most often. Those are the Mission garden varieties too, probably, or they're related to the Mission plant. So hopefully it'll be legal again soon. Almonds. What does that almond look like? Did you know where almonds came from? A lot of people don't. It's a prunus, so if that looks like a peach to you, that's because it is. It's like a peach without much pulp to it, but with a pit or the seed inside the pit that you can eat. Almonds. This is something you just grow for fun. Honestly, I have a thing about almonds because it's a toxic crop if you're growing them commercially. They got to spray so much crap on these things to keep them alive. The poor bees that they hire to pollinate these plants, they have to truck bees from all over the country, all over the world actually. They sometimes ship bees across the ocean to pollinate almond crops because their crops are so toxic they've killed all the local pollinators. And so I have a thing, but too much water for California too. Growing one plant's one thing. If you're growing one plant, that's not a big deal. But I don't know, almonds. But I think it's interesting botanically. That's when the fruits kind of dry up like that and split. That's the husk, and then you're gonna break that open to get the almond. So it's like a pit within a pit, kind of. You can think of it that way. Go for the garden prince if you find it. The all-in-one is a self-pollinator, but garden prince is a dwarf, so and it's less chill hours. But all-in-one's the one you usually find. And it's kind of weird. I don't know how many people actually grow almonds, but I guess it's fun if you have space. Pecans, a very big crop in Arizona, also sucking our water table down. Is a giant pecan groves that are appearing everywhere. So whatever, but again, there's a difference between agriculture and growing something for yourself. You might want to try to grow a pecan. It's a little tougher in Tucson, definitely tough in Phoenix. Get the Western Schley. That's the one that's more of a personal variety. There's most of the varieties that are out there are commercial varieties, and so they're geared towards that. You probably don't want that. You probably want to get something that's more bred for home growing, and the Western Schley is a better plant for that. But probably I don't know how many people are interested in growing pecans, but you might be interested in it. Juglandaceae, so that's the same family as um, oh gosh, another nut, walnuts, juglans. So, which we'll talk about. Carob. This is actually a pretty good tree for our climate, and there's a lot of old plants, and it was popular. I think they started planting them in the '60s in Arizona. The interesting thing about carob trees, Ceratonia or Carrotonia siliqua. Interesting history about this tree. The seeds are so uniform in weight that they were used to measure gold, and that's what the carat system is based off of. The seeds of the carob tree, Carrotonia siliqua, not spelled with K, but point being that it has a lot of history here. Carob is awful tasting. I don't know who would want to eat carob instead of chocolate, but maybe it's one of those crops that I think if you don't treat it like chocolate and don't expect it to be chocolate, then it's probably delicious. But we've all been tricked. But well, not all of us, but some of us with hippie parents, like this one, where you guys had a carob.
My mom got us carob bunnies for Easter once.
Oh, that's such a terrible thing to do to someone.
It was. I think she was even sad when she tasted them. Not realizing.
Anyway, it's a great tree. It's evergreen. It's really easy to grow. It can be a big tree, over 40 feet sometimes. Really wide. They can get 50 feet wide. You do need a male and female. They're dioecious, so you gotta make sure that you get a male and female. There are some cultivars that are they're self-pollinating because they throw out both sexes in the flowers, and I did list some of those here. So the carob varieties that are in Tucson are they're just grown, and nobody knows what variety it is and what sexes they are. So so if you're going for a fruiting variety, you should probably look out for Santa Fe. It's a good one. It's self-fruitful, and it's got good flavor, they say.
But not chocolate.
I do like this tree because of the historical. There's a question, I think. I like the historical. I love the fact that this is where gold carrots came from. That's a nice little factoid. And it's got a lot of history. It's a Mediterranean plant, obviously. Question?
This one can wait till the end.
Okay. Tamarind. So, tamarind, you probably recognize this if you've gone to Food City, or if you have spent your time in Baja, Arizona, and maybe some time in Mexico. Tamarindo. It's a very like tart. What do you call that? It's an endocarp, but that pod, you're gonna pull off the outer shell, and you got this like meaty, sticky, it almost looks like dried fruit that's around the seeds, and that's what you eat. It's very, it's that kind of flavor is very popular in arid parts of the world because things that are sour sometimes help quench our thirst. there's lots of candies that are made out of tamarindo. There's all kinds of desserts and food that is made out of tamarindo. It's an ingredient you don't see a lot in the U.S., but you do start to see it here. It's an ingredient I'd like to play around with. We have some tamarind in our kitchen, and we play around with it sometimes. But there's a lot that you can do with it. It's a tropical tree, so not as frost tender as some tropical trees, but it is frost tender. Put it on a south wall. It does like food, even though most legumes don't need a lot of extra food. But this is a legume, Fabaceae. If the pod didn't give that away for you, give that away to you already. If you find varieties rather than just growing them from the grocery store, look out for Manila sweet. But most people just grow the seeds, and they're just fine. I've grown these before. I'll plant a bunch of seeds, and a couple of them come up. So that's kind of cool, right? Then there's the pink tamarind, and this is a Pithecolobium. It's probably not Pithecolobium anymore, because most Pithecolobiums are not Pithecolobium anymore. But anyway, if you know Pithecolobium, it's there's a tree in Tucson that they call the Texas ebony, and that's a Pithecolobium flexicoli. It's now Ebenopsis it's Texas. Totally different. No, it's like Ebenopsis ebano, I think. Anyway, they're related, except this is a tropical plant, and this plant has an edible endocarp as well that's supposedly really tasty. I haven't really had this myself, or actually I might have, and I forgot about it. This one you don't need to fertilize. This one you can just grow and not fertilize because it's a legume. The regular tamarind, for some reason, does need a little food, but this one doesn't. This one's more frost tender, though, so no hint of frost. Just don't let it get frosted at all. English walnut, forget about it. Juglans regia is not going to grow here. It's just not. It's just too hot. However, we have the black walnut, Juglans major. This is our Arizona native walnut, and it is edible and produces lots of nuts that you probably won't get around to eating. Now, there's two ways to eat this. You can eat the dried nut just like most people do. We always have a lot of these from your parents because they have a tree that they always get fruit off of. But apparently, if you pick the fruits soon enough and they're green and they're still soft, you can pickle them. And that's something I've been wanting to do for a long time. So that's kind of cool, right? But yeah, if you want a walnut, don't grow this guy. That's not going to happen. But grow our native walnut, and it does really well here. When the trees are young, they get burned up by the sun quite a bit. They'll still live, but you have to give them a lot of water. There used to be more of them native down at this elevation when we had year-round water down on the Santa Cruz and Rito and all that. But as we've dried up the water table, they're gone, much like the willows and everything else. But it does grow down here, and it does require regular water. A little afternoon break in the summertime is a nice thing to do for the younger trees. As they get older and they get above above whatever's shading them, then they'll be fine by that time. They are deciduous. Feed them just before they leaf out, and just keep them watered. That's the main thing with this. Not as thirsty as a sycamore, but close. You've probably seen this. They call it Peruvian apple cactus sometimes, but it's sort of a misnomer. It's just called apple cactus. There's two species really, but this is the better tasting one, Ceres repandus. There's some confusion about. There's also Ceres hillmaniana or something like that, formerly called Ceres peruvianus, and that fruit's edible too. Oh, what happened? Oh, crap.
What happened?
The battery.
Fuck.
Message him real quick.